What's up, world? This is Ambition Today. On this episode, we're joined by the one and only Peter Kazanjy. Did I say that right, Peter?
Nailed it.
Nailed
Stuck the
it. All
landing.
right. Peter Kazanjy, he's the co-founder of Atrium, a software company which does sales performance analysis. And he's also the author of Founding Sales, a book about how to conquer early stage sales for startup founders. Peter, welcome to Ambition Today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Nailed the intro. Nailed the bio. Well done.
Well, thank you. Well, where in the world are you calling in from today?
I'm in San Francisco right now, in the Alamo Square Divisadero corridor area for people who know what that is.
All right, awesome. Well, we like to start every episode at the beginning of your life and kind of get an understanding of who you are and where you came from. So, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? And a question we like to ask is, were there any entrepreneurial influences in your early life or childhood, teenage years?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm actually from, as I say, for sure, and yeah, I'm actually from Southern California. You can kind of hear it in some of my vocabulary. I'm from Southern California, from Orange County originally. Grew up there. Came up to the San Francisco Bay Area for college, and really started started my journey in technology after college, after kind of like kicking around between a variety of different jobs, primarily in like marketing and writing and what have you. But my undergrad was in English and philosophy, which is not really like a prototypical technology background necessarily. Ended up landing at a company called Vmware, which a lot of folks may be familiar with. Kind of like big enterprise software company. At the time, it wasn't super large. I think it was like, a few thousand people before the company got spun out of EMC and then eventually went public, but started in product marketing there. Which is one of the things I like to say is that product marketing is a really great place for somebody with a humanities background to kind of start their technology journey, insofar as product marketing is largely like, I like to call it commercial storytelling. And so started out with that, and then eventually started spun out of there, and started my first software company, a company called Talent Bin, which was actually a pivot out of original company called Honestly.com, which actually is not dissimilar, because I know that you were at Founders Institute, and Founders Institute largely came out of the Funded, which is like community contributed reputation for investors. Honestly.com was kind of the equivalent for all professionals. So it was like Glassdoor for like professionals, right? Like Yelp for professionals. Ended up not really actually working out, not because everyone's like, oh my God, it's so scary. People are going to say all sorts of obnoxious stuff. Turns out that's not actually the case. People just don't write anything. Right. So like, user generated content business where the users are not generating content, turns out it's not a good business. So we ended up pivoting that to a recruiting software company called Talent Bin. Talent Bin was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, in like a medium small outcome, but not a lot of money into the company. It was backed by first round capital, Charles River Ventures, SV Angel, etc. And then that's really like where I went from being a business generalist founder, kind of like product marketing, product management background, to being our first sales rep, sales manager, sales leader, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of like what started my journey towards, running a sales performance analysis software company. Atrium, obviously.
Well, I want to pause you there, because there's a few things that you kind of touched on that I want to follow up on. So you mentioned that you have a degree in philosophy and humanities. I minored in philosophy, so out of my personal curiosity, right? How do you feel that a degree like that has impacted how you view the world, compared to just going and getting an MBA or something?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing there is that in a humanities environment, really what you're doing is just you're getting really good at like consuming tons and tons of information and reasoning against it, because like literally all your job is just reading. Right. You're just like reading and like you're ingesting a bunch of information and then synthesizing that, usually through like writing again, and kind of like pulling together different streams of information, reasoning against it, and kind of like putting it back out there again. And so really what people talk about, and I adhere to this or subscribe to this comment, is that you're learning to learn, and which is really powerful in a fluctuating environment like technology. There's always new stuff showing up, right? There's always new stuff, and you're problem solving and so on and so forth. So I think that that's where that was really helpful for me, is just like getting very good at like consuming lots of information, synthesizing it, and then understanding like how it impacts like your goal per se.
Right, right.
So that's kind of my take on it.
And then I saw that you attended Stanford, right? And I think
Uh-huh.
a lot of people in Silicon Valley talk about how Stanford is the elite place, gives you.
Uh-huh.
Did you find that going to Stanford gave you a big edge in the Valley, or is that just a myth?
Well, like I'm kind of old and busted. Like I graduated in 2002, and that was kind of before the whole. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? Like
For the real
obviously,
craze.
yeah, exactly. Like, don't get me wrong. Like Stanford is obviously situated in the middle of like the technology and venture ecosystem. I don't know if people. If people who, if your listeners have ever heard of Steve Blank, he does phenomenal kind of research and commentary on the history of the Silicon Valley, and how Stanford was like really wide open to defense funding and what have you, post Second World War and what have you. So yeah, like definitely a platform to jump off of there. There wasn't as much of like a technology craze, like super craze at that point, because PayPal had just spun out of not spun out of, but like PayPal it was kind of the era of PayPal, the era of eBay, things like that. But it was definitely before like every 22-year-old graduate or 24-year-old graduate was like starting their own company. It was more like you would graduate from there and like maybe go work at a VMware, for instance.
Right, right, right. So you talked a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the sales role. So now you have a company, Atrium. What is Atrium, and just at a super quick high level, because I want to talk about why you co-founded it, right? What led you to start a company, et cetera.
Yeah, so Atrium makes sales performance analysis software that helps managers do data-driven team management. And so the way to think about it is, I don't know if you're much of a sports guy, but it just turns out that like if you want to instrument the performance of a sales organization really and drive success, really what you need to do is just instrument at a very granular level, at the human level. And that's very doable the same way that like instrumenting a basketball player or baseball player, football player, what have you, can be done with a variety of metrics that are actually kind of the same regardless of what team you're talking about, right? So like it
Right.
turns out like the number of shot in let's use basketball, like the number of shots, your shot percentage, how many threes you're taking, et cetera, possession time, plus minus, things like that. That's actually uniform regardless of the team. And you see that kind of showing up in the analytics craze, and like basketball and baseball has obviously been like way more analytically driven for a long time. You can apply the same stuff to sales performance. And so that's essentially what we do, is just make it such that an organization can turn on access to the data in their CRM. We work with Salesforce, and within 90 seconds have a super rad performance analysis harness in place that also does continuous monitoring and statistical analysis on it. So the way to think about it is like just giving a sales operations analyst to every single sales manager, SDR manager, to help them look around corners and use data in order to intervene with their reps where necessary, and just in general make everybody better. So it's just like Bill Belichick or Bill Walsh or what have you, um, rendered for sales teams.
Nice. So on the path to founding Atrium, right? I think you mentioned that you started a few different companies. After you've taken a few swings at bat here to keep the sports analogies going, how do you think about starting a company today versus, maybe, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, well, I think that the back to the thing about like lifelong learning or taking advantage of kind of like research that's been done. I think the amount of information that's available to entrepreneurs nowadays is just really pretty amazing. So when we first started honestly.com, it was like a failed hypothesis. Like we probably could have, without building software, we probably could have like validated the fact that people weren't going to like surface people weren't going to surface community contributed reputation reviews in scale. But unfortunately, like we went and spent like $50,000 or like $25,000 or whatever it was, like building a prototype with some offshore development team. And of course, like that's super anti lean startup, for instance. Well, guess
Right,
what?
right.
Lean startup didn't exist at the time, right? Like Steve Blank's 4 Steps to Epiphany and the Startup Owner's Manual wasn't super broadly broadcast. And so I think nowadays there's just like the craft of technology startup instantiation and then scale is just so much further along. And so if you avail yourself, if you're an entrepreneur and you avail yourself to that information, whether it's like Steve Blank's book or Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, and then along your journey from like a scale standpoint, like my book on sales and what have you, you're just going to be so much further ahead. Like people talk about like, oh, it's so much cheaper to start a startup now because of AWS, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yeah, but you can still build a bunch of like stupid shit that doesn't matter. Right?
Yeah,
You're just
really
doing
easily.
like,
yeah,
you're just doing it. You're doing it for cheaper, but you're like still wasting your life or wasting 6 months or like wasting 12 months. So I think it's just like the craft is just like so much more advanced nowadays. And that's awesome.
yeah. There's definitely an abundance of information that's out there. It used to feel like having access to that information was like kind of opening Pandora's box, and it was like locked away, and you stumbled upon some secret, and now it's on every podcast, it's on every website, VC blog, it's all over the place. So it really does come down now to execution, I would say. So how do you
Yeah.
think about that? How do you think about, so if all the tools are in the toolbox, right? What do you think and everyone has access to those tools. What do you see most often kind of separates the people that push forward from maybe getting stuck?
Oh man. Well, geez. Kind of, I can't really speak to consumer technology companies because that's kind of like crazy alchemy or what have you. But I think the biggest thing in like B2B is probably the age old just ability for people to grind and just like keep going and just keep going and keep going. I don't think that that's changed at all.
Yeah.
I think probably back in the day, it's just like kind of the numbers game. But back in the day, you had to maybe grind longer because you would make dumber decisions because you were like less informed because the state of the craft was not as advanced. But I think actually it's just people who can maintain focus. I forget who it was that commented this to me, but like the main three. The three main rules of startups is focus, focus, and focus. So people who can maintain focus and just kind of keep going through the ups and the downs. Bill Lee, who's a pretty famous investor who's at Craft Ventures right now, jokes about the fact that starting a company is kind of like eating a bowl of glass, and it's true, right? And so the people who can just persist and persist through the ups and downs while kind of compressing how long that shitty journey is. And like one of the ways that you compress that is by making good decisions, by informing yourself, and and kind of coming up to the kind of the tip of the branch with respect to like the craft of building companies.
Yeah, it is tricky. We kind of had the same thing. We had Jeff Wald on, who founded Work Market, and I think he's sold 2 companies now for almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
we were talking about how the ability to just last and keep going and hustle and grind, but then at the
Yeah.
same time we were how do you balance that against time to give up, right? And what are the signs? And we were talking about Jeff's point, like you just can't be stupid, and you just if you got to find ways to separate people from their money to make a profit for the business, and
Sure.
if you can't do that, then it becomes clear over time. But how do you think about that? How do you think about the ability to grind and keep going, and the resilience and figuring it out, and then when it's time to pivot? I won't even say give up. When it's time for a change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the pivot thing is exactly right, and this is what Eric Ries talks about quite a bit in Lean Startup, and Steve Blank talked about. But I think like you need to have a credible hypothesis for why the current thing isn't working. It can't just be like, oh, I just need to do one more thing, but like have a credible hypothesis for why that thing isn't working, and then very quickly be able to like construct an experiment in some sort of capacity that would indicate that that would indicate that like, okay, cool, we can surmount. So I'll use an example. So Atrium, one of the big things that Atrium does is it not only does it hook into your CRM, it hooks into your email system, your calendar system, and the phone system. And so early on, and the reason why we do that is because that's where the activity that sales reps are engaging in takes place, and you can use that information to analyze their analyze the quantity and quality of selling behavior they're engaged in. early on, the only way that you could like turn on an Atrium instance was you had to turn on access to the CRM, and then you had to turn on access to the email system and the calendar system at an administrator level. Well, the problem is that like the conversion on that was pretty problematic, because like we would enter an organization through sales operations or through sales leadership, and then in order to get access to like the calendar system at an administrative level, like we would have to engage with IT. Well, that's actually where a lot of things would fall off, because like these people, like our stakeholders, would be super excited, but then IT, it's like not really their job, and
Right,
they're
right.
like, oh, I don't know about this, and so we saw that from a conversion rate standpoint. We're like, oh man, we're like kind of taking lumps here, and so what we then constructed a hypothesis. We're like, you know what? Actually, there's pretty mediocre activity logging that's going into into the CRM, but like it's probably okay. It's probably enough to get people stoked out in order to drive to a transaction and then engage at that administrator level. So we're like, all right, well, we're going to make it such that you can just start using Atrium just by logging into your Salesforce instance. And so we built a prototype. Well, so the first thing we did was we interrogated a bunch of Salesforce instances we were already connected to in order to validate that activity was there. And then we built a prototype version of that where we could just like, yeah, just turn on your Salesforce instance. We're good to go. And sure enough, conversion rates lifted, and it's like, all right, cool, this seems like it's credible. So that's like that loop of like, oh, this is a problem, let's be eyes wide open about it. Oh, let's form a hypothesis and like test it as quickly as possible. And then in this case, we're like, all right, we have survived to live another day. But if you ran into something where like, oh yeah, there's no information in there, you're hosed, right? So then maybe you have to pivot your sales motion to just be very top down. But it's just about those, like that loop, right? That learning loop.
Yeah, creating that feedback loop, and most importantly, you were measuring those things, right? You were measuring things like conversion and all of that, and a lot of times I see founders don't necessarily have those metrics pinned down, right? To measure them week over week and see where they can make the optimizations.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes back to the craft thing, right? So most founders don't have a background in sales. They come from technology land or product, their product manager by background or consultant by background, or or an engineer by background or designer by background. Right. So they don't necessarily know what those things are. The good news is now there's like books on it and like podcasts on it and things like that. So like in that case, you can't like, you're not 6 months down the road and you're like, oh, why are we not closing any business? Oh, I guess I should have been measuring conversion rates between stages this whole time. Now you can like, oh, I'm going to start doing some sales. I guess I should read a book on startup sales. Oh, here's the section on, instrumentation and metrics harness. Oh, I guess I should start paying it. I should have stages in my sales process. And that way, what I can do is measure the conversion rate between them. Oh, wonderful. So now you know that ahead of time, as opposed to learning 6 months later down the road, like, oh, I guess I should have been capturing that data. Crap.
Yeah, and just staring at a blank wall and wondering why things aren't working, right?
Why is it not working?
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Peter, we're going to take a quick break here. We're here with Peter Kazanjy talking about his company Atrium and his new book, Founding Sales. We'll be right back with more Ambition Today. All right. Ambition Today is brought to you by Finta. If you are considering fundraising or actively fundraising right now, then you need to check out trustfinta.com. Finta creates deal rooms that you could share with one link, one click with investors, and they can see everything they want, everything they need in one place, organizing the deal, containing everything like the terms, the pitch deck, the company information. And investors prefer it because they could see all of the information that they want anyway, and you're not getting stuck in multiple Dropbox links, Google Drive folders, etc. And so if you want to check it out, check out trustfinta.com to set up and build your first deal room for free. Also, the A-List. As you know, after every episode of the podcast, we ask our guests what is the greatest piece of advice they've ever learned. And so after this episode, we're going to ask Peter, and if you want to hear that answer, you can go to sysguard.co/A-List. And you can check out all those answers from all of our guests from the past 2 years. So thank you, everyone, for listening to Ambition Today. If you're enjoying the show, then don't forget to leave us a review in the Apple, Spotify, Google podcast store. If you're watching on the live stream, hit that like button. Thank you very much. And now back to this episode of Ambition Today. All right. Thank you, Peter. Welcome back. We're here with Peter Kazanjy, and we're talking about his journey building Atrium and his new book, Founding Sales. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Peter, is I'm starting a company right now. And, we did sales probably earlier in 2020, like maybe January, and we found that the product wasn't where it needed to be, and so
Sure.
we took our sales hat off and we put our product hat back on, and so we've spent a lot of 2020 building. We had probably hundreds of customer conversations and building features that they've been requesting, and so doing that lean startup process. And so now it's time to go back to sales. And something that really resonated with me was literally like the intro to your book is, taking that product hat off, it's a mindset change, right? And getting back into sales. And so teeing this up for you, right? Like, why did you write this book? Why did you write Founding Sales? Because that's how it resonated for me.
Yeah. So really, I was not in a dissimilar situation to you back in 2009, 2010, where we had, we decided that honestly.com was not working. We were pivoting to another idea. We actually participated in a lean user experience like boot camp with a woman named Janice Frazier, and we actually participated in the same class as the guys from Poll Anywhere, and then also this like little company called like Zimride was there, who was like trying to figure out their pivot, and like lo and behold, they pivoted into Lyft and kind of worked out okay. And so we were kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to do, and so we kind of converged on this idea of proactive referral recruiting, and kind of built a prototype that we called Talent Bin, and that eventually became kind of open web talent search and marketing automation for recruiters. And so the big thing though was that we were going from like what was the kind of like a B2B or B2C2B business in the form of honestly.com, which is like a failed hypothesis, to just like a pure B2B like SaaS offering. And so at the time I was like, all right, well, engineers are like building software. My co-founders, he has a kind of a similar background to me, like, complementary, but a little bit overlapping. It's like, okay, well, he's gonna be working on all the product stuff. I guess like I need to go and sell some stuff. And so get in front of those customers. And so when I went to go do that, I kind of was like, okay, well, I'll just read like the documentation on this to start, right? Like I'll just read the canonical books on this. And it just turned out there wasn't really anything there. Like the closest thing was Aaron Ross's Predictable Revenue. But the thing with Predictable Revenue is actually more about like scaling up, because it talks about some of the stuff that they innovated at Salesforce around like SDR AE abstraction and the ability for SDRs to engage in like scaled outbound behavior and then flip that information, or like flip those opportunities to AEs. It was less about like that very, very beginning of getting from like 0 to 10 to 20 customers. So the good news was that I had a bunch. We were backed by first round capital. So first round capital has like a pretty heavy investment in a portfolio community and network. And so the good news was I was able to learn from a bunch of really great entrepreneurs who had kind of done it before. So like Sean Black previously led sales at Trulia, and then he was running a software company called Crunched, which was eventually, or Sales Crunch, which was eventually acquired by ClearSlide. There's Angus Davis, who's now a general partner at Foundation Capital. At the time, he was running Swipely, which then pivoted to Upserve. So it's just like there was a number of people who were kind of like, could coach you up on the side, but there really wasn't any kind of like core documentation on it. And so I kind of had to like learn the hard way, if you will, take a bunch of lumps, bang my shins on a bunch of stuff. And so when we were eventually acquired by Monster in 2014, I was like, yeah, man, that kind of sucked that there wasn't any documentation on that. And like, I'm a pretty okay writer, and I just like have all this information. So like, why don't we just like put it down on paper? Or in this case, it was just like a bunch of Google Docs that were kind of like hyperlinked to each other and kind of like being passed. And then I started like, making them public, and people would kind of like pass them around to each other. So like anytime you would pop into the Google Doc, you'd see like all the little like anonymous emus and zebras or whatever. And you're like, all right, there's like 50 people in here today. And so, it kind of just, I guess it was like very lean startup-y itself. It would start with an MVP, in the form of like a, first chapter, and it just kind of grew from there. And then eventually we got it up on its own site. So one of the things I'm a big fan of is like, like what hypertext is great because you can search it, you can send people hyperlinks, you can come back to it, etc. So the entire book is up at foundingsales.com. And of course, we have like physical copies as well that that now we have up on the Shopify store as well. Still haven't got it up on Amazon because
Yeah. Well,
unfortunately,
I saw you're
I'm
up
a
on,
regular company.
I saw you're up on Holloway as well, which is pretty cool. I've been following them.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Holloway, and largely because you hear this theme, right? Like I'm a big fan of documentation and knowledge sharing and what have you. And so Holloway, of course, the vision is is to be like the Spotify, Netflix, et cetera, of web native books. And so they've been doing some of their own books, angel investing. I think tech recruiting, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, guide to
There's one on
it's like
remote teams. There's one on fundraising. There's a few. Yeah, it's
yeah.
pretty cool platform to check out.
Yeah, for sure. But then what they were like, hey, like they're starting to bring on other people's content, if you will. And so in this case, they were
Yeah.
like, hey, like I knew Andy Sparks is one of the founders, and I was like, yeah, sure. Like you guys can use my book as like a bootstrap mechanism to start building out your catalog. But yeah, that's like one place where it lives. I need to get it up on Amazon. We haven't quite gotten our act together there, but we're selling like a ton off of our Shopify store, which is hilarious. I think there's a lot of appetite here because a lot of product managers, a lot of engineers, a lot of designers who are like, what's this sales stuff? And it turns out that it's not like black magic. It's just a craft, right? And
Right.
and you can learn it. It just like you just have to have the information and then just do the push-ups, right? Like do the
So
repetitions.
so for those who are listening, what would you say? Like, what is the first thing you would recommend if someone doesn't have a sales infrastructure in place and they want to do founding sales for early startups? What is the first piece of advice you typically give people?
Well, I think the first piece of advice is that you just got to get comfortable like talking to people,
Yeah.
which is just if you think about it, like if you're an engineer or designer or or product manager or whatever, you spend a lot of the time just like single threaded, like deep work for like hours at a time coding or writing or working on slides or whatever. And like really in sales, I like to call sales kind of like the grease in the economy. Like all you're doing is you're interfacing between somebody who has a potential problem and a potential solution. And so like you are that interface. And so really like the KPI is just, how many customers are you talking to? How frequently talk. And this is why it lends itself really well to instrumentation, because the number of customer facing meetings that you're having isn't a very important KPI. The number of first customer meetings that you're having, the total amount of time that you're talking to customers, just like talk time, the number of emails that you're sending. And so it's just, yeah, like you were noting, the first chapter in Founding Sales is on sales mindset changes, because it's just like it's such a mindset shift, because you're like, wait a minute, I'm gonna have 5 of the same conversation in a day.
You're
That
gonna
sounds,
have more than 5. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're like, that sounds repetitive and exhausting. And it's like, yep. And
Yeah.
that's your job now.
Yeah,
Get used to it.
one of the things we did this year that I liked, I'd love to get your take on, is so we basically short circuited the sign up process, and so all roads of the sign up process didn't actually lead you into the product. It led to a phone call with me. So I was constantly just having phone calls and talking about
Right.
that problem and then bringing them into the product. So I got to not only hear the problem before they signed up, see how
Sure.
they reacted to using the product in real time. And then we signed up for this software that I'm really enjoying called Product Board, where you can catalog all that feedback and then
Yep.
automatically highlight specific parts of that feedback and assign it to features. So you could
Yeah.
build your product roadmap just based off all these conversations and start to see what bubbles to the top as far as actual demand for feature sets. And so that's sort of the process that we followed this year, and I really enjoyed it. It was a good process. Do you have tactics or things like that you recommend or what do you do? I guess that's maybe a better
Well,
question.
it,
What
it
is
kind
your
of it kind of depends on like what stage you're at. So I think the first thing that's really important to do is which is kind of the pre-founding sales. Like one of the things I like to joke about is that like founding sales is kind of like the sequel to like lean startup, and it's the prequel to predictable revenue and kind of like these other guys, right? And so if you're at the very very beginning of things, you're really you're not engaged in sales. You're engaged in customer development and customer research and what have you. And so the great things to do there are lots of customer interviews, right? There's a really phenomenal article on First Round Review called "Get in the Van." It's by a gentleman named Michael Sippy, who's been a product leader at Twitter and Medium or what have you. And that's actually what we use for our product research at Atrium. We did about 150 customer interviews and kind of eventually like converged on what the problem was. Like we started out pretty broad. We were talking to like sales leaders and CFOs and CEOs and heads of customer success and saying like, how do you instrument human performance? And eventually kind of said like, okay, the sucking sound seems like it's over here in sales land. We already thought that was the case. So like, let's dig in there. How do you do this right now? Oh, we have a bunch of BI in place. It sucks. Nobody looks at it. It takes so damn long to set up. And then like once it's set up, nobody can actually manipulate any of the reports. And by the way, nobody looks at the dashboards. Oh, that sounds like that's pretty crappy. Yeah, it is. What would you rather have? Oh my God, I would just love it if something told me like which rep was like, sucking and where. That actually sounds like something that we can maybe do with like, statistics. All right, great. And then you start like hearing this again and again and again and again. And what you end up, so like that's the customer research phase. And then when you're engaging in sales, like it's like this continuum where you go from like product management to like weaponized product management or product marketing, where you're like packaging the problems that you heard and the solutions that you fit to it into a set of assets that you can say like, hey, we did this research and we heard all these problems. Do you have any of these problems right here? Oh my God, I have that one right there. I just hired 15 reps and they're ramping right now. I have no idea how they're doing from a precursor KPI standpoint. Oh my God, I know it's so sucky. How are you dealing with that right now? Oh, we're not. And we already had 2 of them who like failed out. Oh man, that sounds like a huge problem. What are you doing about it? We don't know. We're just kind of like really upset about it. And like, our investors are mad at us. Oh, interesting. Well, we have this like interesting thing. It's called Atrium that actually monitors the ramp of those reps proactively. Did you want to maybe hear more about that? Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Right. And so like, that's essentially a discovery conversation that then pivots into like, a little bit of like presentation and a pitch. But really what that is like that was set up by the customer research and the product that it's fit to. So like it should be and unfortunately it's not just like you do this and then you do this. It's more like you do this.
Right.
You do this.
You wouldn't be able to hit the nail with the hammer had you not done in the sales conversation, had you not done that earlier work, right?
But yes, but at the same time, then like you're like, oh, and we built this thing, and like, what do you think about this? And they're like, yeah, it's missing this. That sucks. And you're like, ugh, and then you have to then loop back. Right. So like and this is why very early on, and I think you heard this, is like it's a looping process. And this is why I'm a very big advocate of founders doing that initial selling, right? That evangelical selling and founding selling, because, as the founder, you're gonna be the primary subject matter expert, at least if you've done your product research or your customer research well. And so like having a sales rep who's like going out and doing that for you, and then like coming back and then like, parroting that to you. And then that goes to like, you're playing this game of telephone versus like, if you can just get it from the horse's mouth and say, oh, you know what? You're actually not asking for that feature right there. You have this other problem, which actually we solve already. Like you can just make those loops much, much faster, which is why my claim to people is that it's easier for a founder to learn basic sales than it is for like an early stage salesperson to learn product management and to learn and to like learn your subject matter until you package the sales motion, at which point now you're just teaching that sales motion to those individual reps and they just like turn and burn.
Rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, cool. So I want to jump to a new thing here that we started doing recently called the Gauntlet, where I'm going to list a series of business categories, and then based on what you're seeing, work for companies right now, maybe just share one tip or tool or process that you love in each of these, 5 or 6 categories. Sound good? We'll rapid fire them.
Sure.
All right. Number 1, branding and design.
Oh, branding and design. I think one thing that's been extremely helpful there. I wouldn't claim to be great at branding stuff, but if folks haven't gotten into Canva as an individual, like as a product marketer or product manager, like you can make your slides way better if you're if you use Canva versus just kind of like goofing around in PowerPoint. So you can definitely like up your game there. It's very helpful.
All right. Go-to-market / marketing strategies.
Go-to-market marketing strategy. Probably the big thing there, and we do this a little bit as well, is community marketing. So
Mhm.
we happen to, one of the things that we also run is a community called Modern Sales. It's the nation's largest community of sales operations, leadership, et cetera. It's a peer education community. It's kind of patterned after what First Round Capital had done for their portfolio. So it's about 20,000 sales operations, sales leadership folks. It grows, about like 500 people a month or so. And so the cool thing is like, if you can build your audience before you build your solution or in parallel with your solution, you can then kind of have like a ready-made audience to sell into. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
powerful approach if it works. Salesforce did a little bit where they built Salesforce and they built Dreamforce and all of that kind of like after it, but like you can kind of do that in parallel too.
I've seen a few people do this community approach. Do you have advice on how you kind of kickstart that network, right? Because at a
Mhm.
certain point, there's 40 to 150 people in it, and that's maybe not enough volume for there to be content to keep other people engaged. And
Yeah, so I think the way that you do that is the community is about their problems as opposed to your solution. So
right, right.
Envision did a really good job of this. There's a woman named Claire Bird who was responsible for it. So like use Modern Sales as an example. Modern Sales is not about Atrium. Modern Sales is about modern sales, right? There's lots of different problems that people
Right.
have when they're trying to run a data driven, operationally excellent modern sales organization. And so if you make it about the category and the problems that the people have, and then they won't run out of things to talk about, right? Also, and then also if you just make it about your offering, people are like, what's this advertisement? I'm out of here, right?
Right, right.
Versus just making sure that they're there learning from each other and getting value, like you'll be good to go.
All right. Product development.
Product development, I think the analytics has been extremely, like, product analytics nowadays is something that you can really get good at very quickly. So a couple of things there. Obviously, like Amplitude is fantastic. We use the heck out of it at Atrium. Another offering that I love is the company called Census. Not to be confused with the actual census that's going on right now. They're actually at getcensus.com. It's like my new crush. What you can do is you can pipe product data into your CRM. So for instance, we have all of our customers are in our CRM as like contact objects. So like all of the various people who are, use Atrium, because we have like, north of 100 customers right now and probably about like 50 anywhere between 10 and 50 users each. Well, you can pipe product data into those contact objects. So like, how many page views they've had in the trailing 30 days when their last login was. And we actually have it decomposed into different features like, how many dashboard views do they have? How many rep profile page views do they have? And then once that data is in there, you can do some like pretty cool stuff. Like you can do Salesforce reporting on it. You can do like alerting and what have you. So just like getting way more data driven earlier on product development is something that like now folks can do, and it really kind of
Right.
helps that drive that loop process even faster.
All right. Hiring and onboarding.
Hiring and onboarding. Oof. Well, one big thing that I'm a huge fan of job simulation. So I'm hiring a bunch of account executives right now, and the more you can have people do their job in the interview process, the better. Like you'll very quickly be able to understand if they can do it or if they can't. Versus like, don't tell me that you can do the job. Just show me. Just show me.
Right.
Right. So if you're hiring SDRs, it's like, hey, write up 3 emails that are, that would be a 3 email drip sequence that you would send to a customer. If it's an account executive, it's like, great, let's just like run a sales process with me. Let's do a disco call. I'll be your prospect. Let's do a demo, a 15-minute disco call. Let's do a 30-minute or 45-minute demo, et cetera. So, and just run it like an op. Show, like, flex down. Show me how awesome you are. Not a lot of software that kind of like exists in that. I know in
That's
terms
a
of,
good tip.
yeah, for sure.
All right, last one. Sales, revenue, accounting, sort of, monitoring those metrics. Obviously, you
Yeah.
got a good one here.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a big thing that's going on right now where like technology that would only be deployable at a much higher like much larger organization now, because of SaaS delivery and like product-led growth, can be pulled forward, right? So like Atrium is a good example of this. Like our joke is like you trip over your mouse and 90 seconds later you have like a better instrumentation harness for your sales organization than if you had like 3 sales ops people working on Looker for like a quarter, right? That's showing up in other categories as well. So like there's a company called RevOps that does this for that does it for like CPQ, so configure price quote. Like you can have a really awesome CPQ process before you have like 30 reps, right? And you have to implement like Salesforce SteelBrick and what have you. But there's just like there's so many things that are going to making it such that you can pull that technology forward, such that a 10-person sales organization can have the superpowers that usually were only reserved like for a 100-person sales organization.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Thank you for sharing those answers. We got time for a few more questions here. So, I guess let's switch it up a little bit and talk a little bit more about life. So, as a founder, you've started a few companies. How do you think about work-life balance? Do you have any kids? How do you balance family versus work? How do you handle and think about all of that?
Yeah, if I said that I had it figured out, I'd be totally lying. I have a 3-year-old who is absolutely fantastic. He just started school. Obviously, for anybody who has kids nowadays and is working from home while trying to orchestrate the kids, it's super challenging. He just went back to school to preschool. So I think one of the things that I'm a big fan of, and I tell my account executives this all the time, is that calendar is destiny. And so if you, whether you're
I
an
like
account,
that. I've never heard that before.
yeah, if you're an account executive, if you're an SDR, if you're a founder, like your calendar is like where you're actually going to end up spending your time. And so I'm just a big fan of like time blocking as much as possible. So like after this, I have 2 hours blocked to put together the slide deck for this master class I'm doing on goal setting and goal monitoring for modern sales. You could do this in your personal life too. So for instance, I have large calendar blocks to make sure that I'm taking the kid at certain points. My wife has been amazing. She's not working right now in managing him, but like you don't want to miss out on those things. And so I have large calendar blocks on Saturdays and Sundays. We actually try to KPI ourselves. I know it sounds ridiculous. We try to KPI ourselves on like some sort of a cool thing that we do as a family every at least once a month, that's like outside of San Francisco. But just like if you say, hey, here's a problem, and we should probably solve that. Okay, well, like let's test that. Oh, well, it turns out we really enjoy, like we just started doing pizza night every Friday night. I know it sounds ridiculous, right? But it just turned. It's now we have.
Sounds awesome to me.
Well, it is awesome, but it's like, hey, we're gonna let's like test this thing out, and now we have this like 3-hour block every Friday. We're like, that's the thing we do, and we like make pizzas together, and like it's super awesome. And like, or if it didn't work out, you're like, all right, can that? Let's like figure out some sort of something else, and like systematize the thing that works, and then just like and then put it on the calendar so you make sure that it happens.
Awesome. All right. One of our final questions here before we jump over to the A-list, the bonus segment. What's your end game? How do you think about legacy at all? Do you, as far as life, what drives you? What are you doing it for?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think I've been thinking about this a lot right now because I run our sales organization, our marketing function. I have an amazing customer success leader who reports to me, who handles that. But I'm now kind of abstracting myself away, so I'm hiring a head of marketing right now, so I can leave that behind. And I'm going to hire somebody who's a sales leader to take that over from me. As Molly Graham from Quip. Actually, she's now at Landa School. Talks about like I'm giving away my Legos. Here you go. These are your Legos now. And so I think really what it comes down to is that like entrepreneurship is a phenomenal way of like forcing yourself to learn. It's like you have like an economic incentive to learn things. And so if you get joy like I do out of like learning new stuff and kind of synthesizing it together with other stuff, my friend Brian Murray, who works at Craft Ventures, calls it like if you're an infovore, which for whatever reason I am, it's a really fantastic just forcing function to like learn new stuff. And I almost maybe think that that's kind of like an end unto itself. Like it creates all sorts of
Yeah.
like positive externalities. Like you create new innovation or what have you. You can teach other, like my dad's an engineer by background. My mom's a teacher. And so like, not only can you consume this information, synthesize it together, you can turn around and teach it to other people, which is, what I've done in the form of like the book and then also with your staff that you manage and what have you. But I think that
You
that's
you
just kind of like the game.
you stay in a state of constant growth, essentially.
Yeah, that's a much that's a much more succinct and great way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it too. I mean, I find anytime I'm in a place where I'm growing, I'm being challenged, I'm happy. And
Yeah,
anytime I've ever had a job or anything where like that growth stunts or starts to stall out, or people kind of like just do your thing over and over again. Like why would you want to have any ambition? Hence the name of this podcast. Uh, you know, you start to die a little bit inside, or at least I do. So I love that answer about kind of finding that sustained growth and always learning.
yeah, for sure. Yep,
Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
super
Where
fun.
can people go pick up the book? Where can they go find out more about you?
Yeah, I just if you Google founding sales, I don't know how I got the domain, but like it's right there. It's the top
There
result.
you
So
go.
like the book is at foundingsales.com. The entire book's there. Like it's all my wife hacked Squarespace into what essentially is a like book CMS. It's pretty fantastic. And of course there's
Nice.
physical copies that you can buy there as well. But like that's the best place to go check it out. And if you run a sales organization, like if you have a sales organization that's greater than 10 reps, like 5 SDRs plus 5 AEs or larger, Atrium is really fantastic for sales performance analysis. We're at atriumhq.com. So if that happens to apply to you, check it out. It takes like 90 seconds to set up an amazing performance analysis harness.
All right, awesome. Well, the show notes, which include everything we talked about, those are all up on the website, syscar.co. We're going to take this over to the A-List back channel. And so if you want to check that out, you go to syscar.co/A-List. So stay curious, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode of Ambition Today. All right, we'll take a little, just keep going here. And we'll keep rolling for those on the live stream. Thank you for being a part of the Ambition Today A-List. This is an exclusive piece of content reserved just for you. We're here with Peter Kazanjy. He's the co-founder of Atrium, a sales performance analysis company, as well as the author of Founding Sales, a book about how to conquer early-stage startup sales processes for founding teams. So, Peter, the same question we ask everyone on the back channel. What is the single greatest piece of advice you've learned in your lifetime? And tell us the story of how you learned it.
Yeah. So I was kind of reflecting on this when you emailed me about it earlier, and I think it really is like as entrepreneurs we exist to like information process. Like I don't know if anybody has read um, Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, and one of his key insights is that like entrepreneurs are amazing like information processors, right? And so you're only and like we see problems in the market. We said, oh, that looks like a problem right there. You know what? I bet I could solve that problem by like amassing these resources over here that are cheaper than what would be paid to solve that problem. And hey, there's a spread there. That's called margin. Hey, I get that. I'm the entrepreneur. And so like this is what we do as entrepreneurs. Is like we're constantly information processing and like fitting, identifying problems and fitting solutions to them. Okay, so then the way that you get really good at that is just constantly learning. And I think that's the big thing is that like being in a state of like constant learning allows you to do a better job of like perceiving problems that people would get value out of solving, and then also like forming by virtue of knowing kind of like what's in the cupboard, so to speak, like the available technologies or processes or what have you. Sometimes it's just like fitting a solution that exists in another industry to this industry over here that hasn't heard about it. And it's just like the more and more you're learning all the time, the better off you are, and the better off you're going to be as an entrepreneur. And so where I learned that from is really just my mom. My mom is a teacher. She was a kindergarten teacher, kind of elementary school teacher for a long time, and then she went on to be an administrator and teach teachers, and then she was a professor of education at Chapman University in Southern California. And really just that lifelong learning is something that had been infused in me and my brother and what have you. And I think it's really just come to benefit us as professionals. Just like, yeah, your job is to continue to learn and it's just going to benefit you. So it's kind of a meta skill, if you will. We
Yeah.
talked a little bit about like, humanities, and like, oh man, like, as an English major or philosophy major, like how the hell does that help you like, build sales performance analysis software or what have you? And I think the answer to that is like, you just get really good at like information collection, processing, and kind of like seeing patterns and what have you, and stealing things from other places and what have
Yeah.
you. And that's like my biggest lesson, is just like be a great information consumer.
All right. I love it. That's great advice. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you for sharing and coming on the show. We will see you next time on Ambition Today.